My first wife, Mrs. Huntsinger, passed away on a brain tumor. And if we had the brain scanner during that time, I think I could have saved my wife. That gave me the idea to buy it for our community hospital.
The scanner is a new technology, a means of seeing details of the human brain and body never seen before without surgery. It was invented and developed at EMI's research laboratories near London. It's called computerized axial tomography, CT for short. It's a revolutionary marriage between the X-ray and the computer. And it's the biggest breakthrough in medical diagnosis since the discovery of X-rays. The scanners have advanced rapidly across the world. They've brought CT into the heart of Europe, where X-rays were first discovered. Into action in Berlin goes EMI's 5005, its latest body scanner. The world's first CT patient was scanned in London in 1971. Now, millions have undergone this test, which gives a successful diagnosis in 9 cases out of 10. St. Louis, gateway to the American West, and home of the Mallinckrodt Institute, the world's biggest X-ray complex. With this revolutionary X-ray examination, it's as though the doctors can hinge our body open at any point.
Part of the machine in here will move around you, okay?
Scanning at first took several minutes, so the early machines were for brain study, as the head could be kept still for this long. The much faster body scanner came later. Trials were held jointly at British and American centers. These included the Mallinckrodt Institute, headed by Dr. Ron Evans.
Well, we did the first patient in the United States in October of 1975, which turned out to be a very exciting one. We felt from the beginning that the question of medical from surgical jaundice, the patient who has yellow jaundice who comes in, many of those have hepatitis. It's a disease of the liver itself, in which surgery doesn't help. That decision is very difficult to be made, and we felt CT could do it. The first patient we studied, it was an absolutely perfect study that I still use in talks about how good it was. And we made the decision that it was surgical jaundice, and correctly.
Okay, so there we have aorta, cava.
CT is steadily replacing the old methods of investigation. Invasive, often uncomfortable, they used to be the only way to look at organs like the pancreas, which aren't accessible to ordinary X-rays. To study the brain could involve undesirable procedures.
Okay, it's going to be a little pain in your head. Okay, the air is going into your ventricle system, into your brain. Okay, there will be some pain.
A pneumoencephalogram, which is an air study that people talk about, we used to do 2 or 3 of those a day. A lumbar puncture, or a needle is put into the spinal canal, and air is injected, and essentially let it bubble up into the head. And then the patient is put in all kinds of funny positions. Now that's the study that is at the very top of my list of studies that I wouldn't want done to myself. Now with CT, we're doing 1 of those a week. Sometimes we don't do any in a week. Now, to the 2 or 3 patients a day that we've saved that study, and especially if that patient was me, that test CT is worth one heck of a lot.
All the way down, your head will be close to the ground. We're going to take a picture in this position.
X-rays were discovered accidentally in 1895. The discoverer was a German physicist, Wilhelm Röntgen, remembered by a museum at his birthplace in the Rhineland. Röntgen, who'd been studying cathode rays, exposed his wife, Anna Bertha, for 15 minutes, and the world was amazed by its first X-ray, the bones of a woman's hand. Röntgen tested the properties of X-rays. They pass easily through all soft tissue, so it's hard to distinguish abnormalities. Röntgen won the first Nobel Prize for Physics in 1901. His discovery makes an enormous contribution. The The equipment gets more sophisticated, but X-rays suffer from a major limitation. They stay a two-dimensional record, in which organs appear superimposed on one another. X-rays are short of a new dimension, to unseat the basic photographic technique that stays unchanged for 3/4 of a century. It comes with CT. At EMI, there's royal recognition and a meeting with its inventor, Godfrey Hounsfield. He's an EMI scientist looking for new areas where computers could be of benefit. Where better than X-rays, still producing Röntgen's vague shadowgrams. Tests begin on a rig built from an old lathe. X-ray data is fed into a computer. Would it show up density differences in animal tissues as well as it does on the Perspex model? Hounsfield searches for specimens where he can find them.
I had to go around to abattoirs and cut out brains from cows, but unfortunately these were damaged by their method of killing, so that we found ourselves travelling across London to the Jewish kosher houses in which they killed by bleeding the bullocks. And it was quite a job carrying these across London in a paper bag to put on the machine. The ventricles did show up very well, and it was just a matter then of making a clinical machine to prove that it would work on live patients.
A machine was built and taken for trials at London's Atkinson Morley's Hospital. Dr. James Ambrose.
This is the very first CT scanner which was ever made. It was installed here in 1971. And on October the 1st, we scanned our first patient in it. This patient was actually a middle-aged female patient with a suspected tumor in the left frontal lobe. And we saw the brain in a great deal more detail than we'd expected. We were able to identify cortex, white matter, the ventricular system, and the cystic tumor which was present in this patient's frontal lobe. This was successfully operated on, and this was the result which caused Hounsfield and myself to, I suppose, really to jump up and down like footballers who just scored a winning goal.
Sit up on the table first of all, okay? Then swing your legs up that end and your head goes in here.
The brain was an ideal first target. Its soft tissue is very difficult to see on a conventional X-ray. If CT worked on the brain, it would work anywhere. Not least, CT meant an end to the anguish of many traditional brain investigations.
I'm only too pleased to find that we could just put a head in a hole in the machine and within a few minutes produce a series of pictures without any discomfort at all to the patient.
After the trial here, CT was introduced to America, where 3 million brain scans were made in only 3 years.
CT of the head is definitely established. It's a technique that's demonstrated its improvement in patient care. It's been able to reduce more complicated and difficult procedures, which has been better for the patient, the physician, the hospital, everyone. And there's now enough data that shows that it's a cost-beneficial study as well, that will ultimately become the first test after the physician feels that something may be wrong with the patient's head. More costly, yes, but a decision of which I believe planners, patients, physicians, everybody will agree it's worth the money to have.
With his first body machine, Hounsfield carries on the Röntgen tradition of the family snapshot.
The first body picture I took was of myself, and I was very amazed to see what I looked like inside. We got quite a number of volunteers after that to see how beautiful they looked inside.
Have you had yours taken?
CT scanning was introduced in 1972 at America's big annual convention of radiologists in Chicago. Since then, it's been the talking point of each convention.
I think the historical points about CT is that it ranks with the discovery of Röntgen, of the X-ray, and perhaps ranks with the discovery of the stethoscope. The other point I think is interesting is to envision where it fits in the history of medicine. The CT, it's difficult to place really when Godfrey Hounsfield made his invention because it was a series of research projects over a period of years, but it became clinically available in 1973, and the body machine became available in 1975, so 80 years after Röntgen's discovery. But if you think of hundreds of years of medical science, 80 years of radiology, and 3 or less years of CT, the impact that CT has had on medical care is very important.
The new system can scan the head as well, but there's a special machine just for studying the head. It can focus on the optic nerve or go down to the larynx. EMI's CT 1010. Medical students the world over have long learned about anatomy by studying the dead.
Mr. Chadwick's had a problem.
At Manchester University in Britain, CT enables Professor Isherwood to show his students the anatomy of a live subject.
Some abnormalities which may be related to the pancreas, and we're going to investigate those this morning. Now, Mr. Chadwick's going to have a computer tomographic investigation on the EMI whole body scanner. Ordinary X-rays, no matter how sophisticated you make them, are going to be shadowgrams. Structures are superimposed one on the other. The new advance with computed tomography is to enable one to reconstruct the substance of organs and diseases affecting those organs by a computer method. And what it enables us to do is to look at the horizontal cross-section of the patient in this computed way by putting enough information in about the amount of X-rays going in and recording how much comes out. If you do that sufficiently often and in a sufficient number of times, one can compute the information about the structure through which the X-rays have passed. And we can deduce information about the ability of those structures to absorb X-rays and then reconstruct them by computer methods. What we'd like to see is a horizontal cross-section of the body like this. And this is at a level where the pancreas would be expected to be. Now, on the CT scan here, we're just sectioning the kidneys. There's one kidney, and the black area in the middle is the hilum of the kidney, which is full of urine, full of water. So it appears black on here. And this organ stretched across it must be the pancreas. What computed tomography is enabling us to see, in addition, are the two lower density areas. These are two cysts in the head of the pancreas which are expanding the pancreas and produced by blocking of the pancreatic ducts. And it's the sort of thing we might be looking for in Mr. Chadwick. Now, if you'd like to gather around this, this is a lead glass window, and you can just see Mr. Chadwick is in the hole in the middle of the polo mint there. The polo mint consists of an X-ray tube at one side and a series of X-ray detectors at the other. And those will move round him when we're taking the appropriate exposures, putting in known amounts of X-ray and computing what comes out. So we're literally taking an X-ray slice across him. Now here we're looking at the first section through Mr. Chadwick. Here's his initials on here. And here's his vertebral body. This is the liver and part of the spleen over here. And we're beginning to get hints here, can you see, of calcification, which we couldn't see on the plain films, in the tail of the pancreas. And if you look carefully there, there's a black ring in that area, which is very like that cyst we were looking at in the other patient, in the head of the pancreas.
CT has shown it can cut down the time patients spend in hospital. It also makes it possible for many to be examined as outpatients. But the scanner helps those too who weren't even planning to go to hospital.
21-year-old female with a severe head injury, with a vehicular accident at Lakeshore Drive at the S-turn. Our arrival.
Chicago's got nearly 150 hospitals. Of the 80-odd big ones, already 1 in 3 has gone over to CT, and the number's going up all the time. One hospital's even got 3 scanners. In Britain, a specialist who's scanned many accident victims is Dr. Ivan Mosley, of London's National Hospital.
We have an example here of the most common condition which can occur after head injury, and this is a collection of blood between the brain and the skull itself, which presses on the brain and can indeed result in death. To show this before the advent of CT would have meant carrying out cerebral angiography with injections of rather toxic substances into the arteries leading to the brain. But here, very quickly and easily, within 10 minutes of the patient coming into hospital, we have the answer. This was an alcoholic who fell in the street, and you see here this large collection of blood, which is less dense than the brain, as we can see here, and it's displacing the ventricles away to this side and compressing the whole of the brain, expanding in this region. This is a life-threatening blood clot. This is a girl who, after a party, was beaten up by her boyfriend. And here on the left side is the area of contusion, which is seen as an area of low density, with little spots of blood within it. And on the next cut, you can see the ventricles once again displaced away from the side of the abnormality, and some blood here, which is seen to be less dense than the skull, which lies between the brain and the skull. Now, the scan here tells us, it explains her condition, but it's clear that this is a condition which does not require surgical treatment, and so this is very important in the management of this patient. The third example that I've got here is a boy who was shot by his brother with an air gun, and the bullet entered the skull and passed more or less to the middle, and here is the point of entry of the bullet through the bone of the temporal region. And the track we see on the next cut. Here we can see the track through the brain, showing us exactly where it passed. We can see on these pictures that there is a star effect, lines radiating from the position of the bullet. This is because the bullet, which is very dense, it's made of lead, produces artifacts in the computer that it's as though the computer can't believe that the bullet is as dense as it really is, and so it attributes some of its density to the surrounding brain, producing this effect that looks rather like the moment of impact of the bullet upon the brain. And we were able to see from the position of this bullet on the scan that, once again, this was not in a life-threatening position, and it was decided that it would be better not to remove this bullet. We recently saw another patient who came into hospital complaining of pain in the head. It wasn't until after he'd been scanned that it became apparent that he too had a bullet in the head.
In the United States, local hospitals often get their scanner because leading lights in the community band together to pay for it.
How about that? Now we could take a view of your head. You want us to see if there's anything up there?
The fundraisers are being shown the new scanner by the hospital president.
We have this very nice dance in January, a dinner dance, and all the proceeds that's raised at this dance will go toward the cost of the scanner, as will proceeds from our gift shop here in the hospital. And we have a fashion show in spring, and this is also earmarked for the scanner because it is a very large sum of money, but we feel it's worth every penny.
When we see an EMI scan, we're slicing through the patient's body and looking at them as if they're a tree trunk. And in this picture, we see the kidneys. So you see they're located toward the back of the body. On this view, we see the aorta. All this is small intestine in the front of the abdomen. We see the spine, and all these white areas are ribs. We have controls that we can make the picture very dark, block out everything except calcium, which is in the spine, and make it very light.
I had a question on the white marking up here.
The small one.
The small one, yes.
That's calcium in the patient's aorta. So it's probably a patient above 50.
Bangkok, and a blessing for the first EMI scanner in mainland Asia. It's the latest head machine, CT 1010. It scans in just 1 minute. Only 7 years before, the first experimental scan had taken 9 days. Britain, the birthplace of CT, and the assembly lines where, in less than a decade, an invention has grown into a worldwide industry with potential benefits to medicine so vast they're almost impossible to measure. Each machine is tested for 8 days. The disc of plastic stands in for the future patient. It simulates the full range of densities found in the human body, from the lowest, the air trapped in our lungs, to the densest, our bones. The machine is so sensitive that it will distinguish tumors from surrounding healthy tissue. A fine beam of X-rays from this tube will rotate around the patient, giving 250,000 readings in each picture, and able to identify the tissue density of areas no larger than a pinhead. Detectors receive the rays. A computer turns them into a picture that will show up abnormalities with a clarity never achieved before by X-rays. Completed scanners on its way. X-rays, computers, display devices married into a self-contained diagnostic system, of which 95% go off to the corners of the globe. EMI's first scanners planted the flag of the new medical revolution on America's soil back in 1973. It was the successful trial of the early brain machine at 2 major American hospitals and, later, the trials of the first EMI body machine jointly in Britain and the United States that made the new world the most outspoken advocate of CT scanning. EMI trains engineers and hospital staff in the United States.
Check that patient is indeed in the place where you'd set him, and press the Start Scan button.
The training is helping to meet an almost overwhelming level of demand for CT scanning. It's helping turn a new technology into an everyday tool.
So we'll continue for 20 seconds, taking 18 traverses, 10 degrees of data on each traverse.
You know, this CT scanner is really quite a revolutionary development, and it's forcing us as radiologists to make a lot of changes in the way we do things. We're used to dealing with films.
Dr. Gilbert Yost of the Mallinckrodt Institute, the world's biggest X-ray center.
Our data now is stored on magnetic tapes like this, and it's, as I say, forcing us to reassess the way we store information about these patients. Terminals like this are scattered throughout our department, collecting information about our patients. We're increasingly using it to monitor the function of our EMI scanners and to process the data from our EMI head and body scanners. We certainly see a day when information from these CT scans will be stored in a central data bank within a computer, and computers from various parts of the country can have access to those scans. It will be possible to transmit scans over telephone lines to different parts of the country, so that a patient out in the country who can't get to a major medical center could have a CT scan done near their home, and that information could be transmitted to the expert at a medical center for interpretation.
Godfrey Hounsfield has gained many international awards, but the man who first coupled the computer with X-rays is modest about his success.
I think I'm very lucky to have thought of this idea. I was thinking about it quite a lot wandering around the countryside. Things seem to just have dropped into place like a jigsaw right from the very start. I get quite a number of letters from people who've had scans, had an operation, and have written to me thanking me very much for the scanner. It is very gratifying to know that I may have helped a little towards the conquest of disease.
Germany, the birthplace of X-rays, still known here as Röntgen rays after the physicist whose pictures of a woman's hand nearly a century ago changed the course of diagnosis. Now Röntgen marches on, his discovery enhanced beyond measure by the scanner. Berlin takes delivery of EMI's 5005 system, the first rapid body scanner to be installed in Germany. Dr. Ron Evans, chief of the Mallinckrodt Institute, believes many of the benefits are still to come.
I think that the major possible roads for the future with CT are several. One will certainly be in treatment planning, staging of patients with cancer, and their follow-up. Because the decision as to whether the treatment is surgery, or radiation therapy, or chemotherapy, various drugs, has to be made with an exact analysis of how far the cancer has spread. And this better image of the body by CT now allows us to have a new device to make that kind of decision. There are some other areas that will be a very important part of CT in the future. Heart disease, the application to the skeletal system, the application to the chest, the application to the extremities. We're just beginning to work on that. So that's the challenge for the physicians. Many institutions around the world will be making those evaluations. With new improvements in technology, with new improvements that we find as physicians, I think that we'll be able to demonstrate soon very many uses to nearly every patient with disease that CT has made possible. And the challenge to us as physicians, to the companies who are providing us the equipment, to make this a more important procedure, both in diagnosis and therapy, is our challenge for the future.
So, bitte mal einatmen. Nochmal einatmen.